Hi, my name is Sheridan, and the talk today is going to be on choking. The reason why I've chosen choking is because I actually recently choked, I have had some personal experience in this situation, and it really baffled me how it happened. I didn't understand it at the time, I thought the most perfect way to understand it is do some research and do an actual talk on it. So the scenario where I choked was I played soccer in a sort of decent over 35s level, and our team basically flew through the league. We won the league by 13 points. We were the highest scorers, conceded the least goals. We were definitely the best team in the league. The top sort of 8 teams split off at the end of the league and played sort of playoffs to get to the grand final. We flew through that and got to the grand final. We actually had a week off before, so we're pretty fresher than our opponents in the grand final. The opponents in our grand final we actually beat twice in the league. So we're definitely a better team. We're better sort of man to man. We're probably better players, more experienced, and we lost the grand final. They beat us 1-0, and we were sort of shell shocked. We couldn't believe that we actually won it. We actually lost it. So yeah, we definitely choked. That was an experience which I need to find out what the hell happened, basically. So what is choking? A lot of coaches and athletes have different sort of understandings and definitions of what choking is. Basically, in essence, choking is when an athlete underperforms in a pressurized situation. Now that can be in a specific event in the game. For instance, a basketball player misses some penalty shots. Normally he would hit 95% of his shots he would make, and he misses 2 or 3 in a row, whatever the case is, due to the pressure. The sort of choking can also be over a whole game, 90 minutes football, or 4 or 5 hours of golf, where the athlete cannot regain control of his performance. So he has a number of different bad decisions and ends up losing the game. So yeah, it's not just one specific event. It's not when people think about choking, they think it's just one specific event, but it can also be a period of happen over the whole game. And it's more of a process. Choking is more of a process than just that specific acute behaviour. We'll sort of look at that process right now. We can go through history, and there give you thousands of examples of choking, but some of the more famous ones in the '91 Rugby World Cup, I remember Kevin Hastings was the Mr. Reliable of Scottish rugby, and he would kick he had a success rate. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a very decent success rate of kicking penalties, and they got to the semi-finals against England, who are fierce rivals. It was 6-all a couple of minutes ago, and he got a penalty literally right in front of the poles, and he could have made that shot blindfolded 1,000 times, and he actually sliced the ball and missed everything, and England actually got another penalty shortly afterwards and won the game, and went through the finals, and Scotland were out. So it's got to be the pressure that got to him. He choked. Another one was another interesting one was in the '96 Golf Masters. Greg Norman played the course on the first day and actually set a course record. And then 3 days later, he was under pressure from Nick Faldo, and he shot 15 shots over, and ultimately lost. So it was just the pressure that got to him, and he folded. So what is actually, what is choking? Hill and colleagues did some studies, and they found that they sort of broke it down into 3 different stages of choking. I mentioned it was a process before. So the first sort of beginning stages of the process before the actual events happened would be, athletes would start thinking about it would be a big important event, and they would probably overthink it, probably maybe outcome focused. There'd be high expectations that they would create upon themselves, and they would think about the high expectations that their coaches, the fans that they would have as well, and they would create anxiety levels would start rising before even the game has started. They might be feeling a bit more inexperienced, perhaps, or it might just be too much. They might be never played in a World Cup before, and this sort of might all create those beforehand. So there's this process starts well before the actual behaviours happen. Then there'd be the mechanisms of choking, which would be the second stage these guys talked about, and that would be sort of when the client the sparks, they would really start the process of choking, and that would be at the time when they may be consumed of fear of losing, or being judged by fans, or again coaches, too much pressure on themselves. They'd be consumed with fear, and then they would be worried whether they couldn't control themselves in a high pressure situation. They might stop trusting their natural instincts, focusing too much on the self. Where there's, in a normal situation, they would sort of rely on their sort of autonomic sort of system of, just flowing through movements, and then just ultimately worrying whether they could cope or not. Then the third stage would be the consequences of this choking, and that, again, obviously would be the poor performance that would happen. There'd be no consistency in their performance, and they would ultimately lose the important match or event. They would begin to negative self-talk, which I'll go through in a minute, but that really kills the self-confidence. And those are the three sort of stages that they sort of identify to understand this choking sort of scenario. So there's been a lot of research into this field, and what they found is that sort of general findings is they have physical effects of choking would be things like the athletes would experience high heart rates, high breathing rates, sweaty palms. More importantly, there would actually be an increased muscle tension, which is kind of interesting, and which would actually directly affect executions of their movements. People, the athletes stop pulling their shots a bit more, or tensing the grip when normally they wouldn't grip. We wouldn't grip so intense, and and those are the more physical sort of side effects of choking. These psychological effects are pretty detrimental, though, and how they're explained is the athlete becomes their focus, their attention becomes very much internally. They become consumed with this sort of fear of losing rather than their ambition to win. And really negatively impact their performance. Another thing that happens is they start to their focus and their attention becomes very static. Games are fast moving and dynamic, and they can't change their attention, their focus according to the demands of the game, and this leads to bad decisions ultimately, poor coordination, and they lose games, and this is when the athlete really battles to gain control of his performance, makes a bad decision, pressure builds up, it's a vicious circle, makes another bad decision because of the pressure, the focus and the attention goes out the window, and ultimately again they lose the game. Some of the factors that that happen that maybe reasons why athletes choke is that some of the more studies that were done is Jordan and Hartman in 2008 did some studies, and their conclusions, but they did the studies with soccer players, and what they found is they had soccer players who would scenario, where they'd be shooting to not lose, so the focus would be don't lose, and then another scenario of soccer players where they'd be shooting to actually win the game. And what they found was that there was a high success rate in the execution in soccer players were actually shooting and focusing on winning the game rather than shooting to not lose, which is kind of interesting. There was another study done by Wilson, Vine and Wood in 2009, and they focused on something called the quiet eye. The quiet eye is a period of time, sort of that last focus, between that the eye does before the execution, where the sort of real fine points of the motor patterns of the brain actually set in just before, the ball is hit. And what they found is the levels of anxiety in these studies shortened this quiet time, which is really interesting. And ultimately, athletes don't execute their movements successfully when they have this shorter period of focus, whereas in a non-pressurized situation, they probably would have been able to focus slightly more and nail their executions. Another factor that lends to choking is done by another different sort of study. I think it was Nieves, Piepers, Ordnance and Barker in 2008. They did some studies where they found that athletes overanalyze their body movements under pressure. So normally an athlete would just flow through his movement, not think too much about the actual step-by-step movements. But because they're under pressure, they're really focused on break down the movements too much, and ultimately that movement suffers, and they don't hit the targets really. So that was pretty interesting. There's quite a few other different factors involved, sort of that help, not help, or just enable the athlete to choke really. Other factors include fatigue. Some athletes overtrain. When you get to the actual event, they're burnt out, and they end up not being able to concentrate enough and lose their game, lose attention. Inadequate motivation. People not bothered enough to win the game, and lose focus. They're curious sometimes. Arguably, looks like he loses motivation and ends up losing a game. And there's audio and visual distractions as well. Some European soccer clubs are very good at distracting their opponents. Galatasaray, Liverpool in the UK, and Celtic in Scotland. I mean, their fans, really try and put their opposition off by the, seeing flares off and the amount of noise that comes out of the stadium. So and ends up these professional footballers actually end up underperforming. So and then again, another big factor is negative self-talk, which I'll go through in a couple of minutes. So how do athletes combat choking? What do they do to help? Sanger, Merchant and Morris did some studies in 2008, and they found that interventions with athletes were pretty helpful and in helping athletes not choke. Interventions, I mean, by what they would sit down with, they get the athletes to sit with sports psychologists. They work through mental strategies and how to cope with these pressurized situations and negative thoughts and that type of thing. They found that routines were very helpful with athletes, either days leading up to big events or even mornings of the events, getting just from their house to the game, not being distracted by all the media and press or whatever. They would just go through and focus on their routines, and that would help them not think about the pressure and build anxiety levels. And then routines, on the specific, shot or a kick that the athlete would do. Look at rugby players; they get some really, really sort of unique routines before they kick their balls to the poles, and that just helps them focus and think about their technique and not everything all the surroundings and distractions. Imagery is a big one as well. They work with athletes to visualize being there, and experiencing the event before even getting there. So when they get there, they'll almost feel like they've been there before. Builds a bit of confidence as well. They can imagine themselves putting off the shot 1,000 times. It builds a bit of confidence. And then there's this thing called self-talk, which so I mentioned the negative side, but the self-talk is literally when athletes talk themselves, and they can positively talk themselves, which just encouragement, nothing specific, just general. Keep your head up. Dig deep, that type of thing. It just becomes more positive, and they can, if they've made a bad decision, they can pull themselves back and try to gain control of the performance. Then there's more instructional self-talk, where it's more specific. Keep your eye on the ball. Head down, loosen your grip, that type of thing, where it's actually towards a specific technique, just to sort of get them back in the game. And then there's a negative to the self-talk, which is really destructive in terms of performance. They sort of become really self-critical, and John McEnroe, perfect example. He'll lose the plot, and it'd be hard for him to regain a shot. So sometimes regain his performance. So yeah, that's I've gone over my time, and I hope you've given a bit of a nutshell on the choking. Thank you very much.